Before we get into this week's interview with our audio influencer, we are going to take a quick break to update you on the latest on podcast news in the industry. Two things I want to update you on, and I'll quickly just give you a rundown on them and then give you my thoughts after the interview if you want to stick around with that. So the two headlines that really stuck out to me this week is podcasts are coming to Facebook, and Spotify bought LockerRoom, which is a Clubhouse alternative. So now they are in the social audio game as well. Quick rundown on the details here from what I know. Facebook, your podcast will be linked to a page, so you need to have a page to have your podcast. From that, you'll be able to listen while using the app, as well as, I believe, if you exit out of the app, you'll still be able to listen to the podcast on some sort of player, like you can on any other podcast player as well. It'll be linked directly to your RSS feed, but you do need to opt in on Facebook. So they are allowing that as of now, as if you're listening to this, they are allowing that, and they are set to go live June 22nd. So depending on when you're listening to this, this will be released June 22nd. So go ahead and claim your podcast and get that on Facebook and see what happens there. With Spotify, they bought the app called LockerRoom, which was a Clubhouse alternative mainly for the sports industry. Now, it's not only sports anymore. Spotify pretty much took their same code. It has a very similar look and feel to LockerRoom as it was before, and now to Clubhouse as well. It is totally rebranded as Spotify Greenroom. So if you're going to your app store, you search Spotify Greenroom and you have access for that. As far as I know, everybody has access at this point. I have an Android and I'm able to use it, so you should be able to use it as well. The key differences between Spotify Greenroom and Clubhouse is Spotify Greenroom, you tend to have the big names on it still in the sporting world just because they've been grandfathered in. There's apparently in-app texting, which I haven't found that feature yet. I think it's something that the host has to turn on from the back end. So I don't know if I just haven't played around enough with rooms that have it, or that's just something that they're coming in the near future as well. The other thing is hosts can request the audio files after the room has been closed. So unlike Clubhouse, where you have to have a third-party recording, with Spotify Greenroom, you can record right there. Lastly, Spotify Greenroom has this thing called gems, which you can give creators. I'm not really sure what that means as of this point. So check out Spotify Greenroom on your app store and make sure that your podcast is on Facebook. Now we'll get into this week's episode, and stay tuned for after the interview, and I'll give you my thoughts on what this means for your podcast, my podcast, and the podcasting industry as a whole. All right, we're back to podcast news with my thoughts. My thoughts let's start with Facebook podcasting. I actually think this is going to be really big for especially small podcasts to be on Facebook, because Facebook already has a ton of attention, where it's hard to get somebody to go from Facebook to a podcast app to start listening to your app and then come back to Facebook where they were. I think it'll be a much easier transition if you're promoting yourself on Facebook to say, hey, you can listen to my podcast on Facebook while you're doing what you're doing. And if you look at human nature, I mean, how many times do you see somebody watching a TV show and on their phone scrolling through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it, TikTok? But if you really think about it, that doesn't make sense, because what they're doing is they're listening to the TV and then they're using their eyes for their phone. I think it'll be natural for people to pick up on listening to podcasts while scrolling through their phone. One, they can do it all in one place, but two, it's just a good user experience to have something in your ears while you're looking at what your friends and those kinds of groups and that kind of stuff. So I think it will be picked up pretty quickly by users. So I'm excited to get my podcasts on there and see what happens to them. The second thing I see happening with Facebook is it'll be a great way for you to get found. Now, I can't say that this is what Facebook's going to do, but it wouldn't shock me if I log into Facebook and I start listening to a certain podcast, ABC podcast, and then one of my friends logs into Facebook and sees a notification that says, hey, 10 of your friends are listening to ABC podcast, like, would you listen to? And then you can click in and listen to the latest episode or something like that. I could see that happening. Now, I don't know if that is going to happen. That would be, I'm sure Facebook might start with that to get people, educated on, hey, you can listen to audio on Facebook, but I don't think that would be forever, as Facebook is going to want you to pay for that exposure eventually. But that brings me to the next thing. I think it will also supercharge your Facebook ads, because right now, if you advertise on Facebook, you're sending them to either your podcast website, to Spotify, to Apple, something off of Facebook, because they can't listen to your podcast. Now, I think you'll be able to, starting June 22nd, I think you'll be able to actually say, listen to my podcast in an ad, and it'll be a one-click, and then they'll start listening to whatever episode it is that you want them to as well. So now that might give you shorter attention span if people are listening to your podcast on Facebook. And what I mean by that is, if they're bored within the first 30 seconds, they might scroll through it. I don't know. That might just be something to consider. Might be something to watch out for. I'm excited to see what kind of analytics Facebook will give us with podcasting, because that's one thing that is really hurting in the podcasting world right now as well. The last thing that I think that this could mean for your podcast, it actually might make your call to actions a little bit more effective, because if people get in the habit of listening to a podcast while they're on Facebook, it means that they're on their phone, which means that if you make a call to action, they could actually act on it right then and there. Whereas if they're listening to the podcast on, let's say, while they're doing the dishes, while they're doing chores around the house, while they're driving to work or from, or what have you, they're not going to be able to stop what they're doing, pick up their phone, go to the website that you said, and then go from there. If they're on Facebook, they would be able to do that. So I think that'll give your call to actions a little bit more kick if you're able to build an audience on Facebook. And the last thing is, as ad tech kind of emerges into the dynamic ad space, where you can have a different ad for somebody who's listening on, Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts or now Facebook, you can have a specific call to action. So maybe you want to promote your Facebook page, or send you a message in Messenger, or something like that, where they're already on Facebook. You have a call to action specific to that. It might be a higher converting ad as well. So those are some things that I think the Facebook podcast might entail. Now, onto Spotify's Greenroom app and how I think this might evolve over time. Now, I just got the app and started playing around with it a little bit, so I'm not an expert on how it works at this point. I'll probably have more content later down the road on how to navigate this whole thing and what it can do and what it can't do. But what I do know is it has this thing called gems, and you can give hosts gems and receive gems. We're not really sure what those mean yet, but I think it's going to be tied to monetization down the road. It also might be a signal to Spotify saying, hey, a lot of people are engaged with this person or this person, and then it could lead to paid programming by Spotify down the line. So if somebody's really popular, Spotify might reach out to them and say, hey, be social audio exclusive with us, bring your show to us, and we'll pay you X amount, like they did with Joe Rogan and stuff. So I see that only being useful if you have a huge following and stuff, but it also might be something that a gem is worth 5 cents or 10 cents or what have you in the future. Whereas if somebody donates that goes to the creator as well, because we do know that Spotify has said that they're going to release more information on their Spotify Creator Fund later this summer, so that's something to watch out, and I think the gems might be tied to that. Now, host can request audio files, making it easier for you to record your room or your group on Spotify rather than Clubhouse. So I think you'll start to see more hosts navigate to or gravitate towards Spotify just because it's easier to get that recording afterwards. Plus, the Spotify already has a big audience. People know who they are. And now that they have this new feature, you know that they're going to be pushing it here over the next couple months to get that going as well. So I think you'll see a steep decline in Clubhouse, and I mean, you're already seeing it with Twitter Spaces coming out and some of these other social apps coming out with the feature that Clubhouse is known for. I don't think Clubhouse is going to withstand that. According to TechCrunch, Clubhouse is already on the decline. I think that will continue as some of these other giants pick up their feature as well. So overall, I think this will make live shows probably more popular, but I don't think it's not going to replace the recorded shows and the produced shows, because there's such a different feel from being live to being pre-recorded and then released, where I think people are starting to realize that the pre-recorded episodes tend to have, at least in my opinion, tend to have more punch in their content. They're a little bit more dense in content, where in live you're listening to people, set up, log in, ask their question, wait for a response, clarifications, those kinds of things, which is not as smooth of an experience. But I do see it being very valuable as a part of your already podcasting strategy. So if you want to do live exclusively, certainly you can do that, but I don't think that's gonna make or break your show either. So anyways, those are kind of my thoughts on Facebook podcasting and Spotify Greenroom. So stay tuned for next time, and I'll update you on next week's news.